So I am honored to be the one today to introduce our guest speaker. The Reverend Dr. Roger Teel is coming for the very first time to the Santa Rosa Center, and he comes to us from the largest center in our movement, the Mile High Church of Religious Science in Denver. Anyone from Denver? Yes. On a typical Sunday, you would find Dr. Roger in their sanctuary that seats 1,500, doing, of course, 3 services. Dr. Teel has been in that pulpit for 23 years and has been leading an ever-expanding and ever more vibrant spiritual community there, blessing tens of thousands of people. So he's written just a beautiful book entitled This Life is Joy. And in order to begin to get to know him, I would like to read to you some words from the foreword that was written by his longtime friend and colleague, Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer says, "The one thing I've always observed about Roger is how much he is loved, rather adored by all his parishioners." And later he writes, "My dear friend, you've helped so many people over the past 40 or so years in your ministerial work and your timely lectures all over this planet. I have long anticipated a book that reflects your kindness, humor, and scholarly career as a minister of spiritual truth." And with that, please help me welcome Reverend Dr. Roger Teel.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, that's tough. I miss Wayne so much, but God bless him. What a difference he made. And I just can't tell you how overjoyed I am to be here, because I know you love Dr. Edward with good cause. He was here first service, and I just love that man, and am so grateful for the leadership he has brought to our entire movement. And what a wonderful center you have created here. Aren't you proud of this place? Yeah, good job. Good job. Well, I bring you love and blessings from your brothers and sisters in Denver at Mile High Church. The partying has only slightly subsided from our Super Bowl victory. But in Denver, we just kind of carry on anyway, all the time. So anyway, we're excited. But I'm so excited to be with you this beautiful day, and also to do a workshop later on at 2 o'clock on my book, This Life is Joy. I actually this week spoke with Dr. Edward, and I said, what are you doing in your services and everything? Is there anything I can support? And I had originally thought I'd even talk about This Life is Joy, but he was saying that you are currently involved in what many of our centers in the movement are doing with A World That Works for Everyone. And so I thought I'd just couple in on that and support that evolving theme that you all are exploring. So my topic for you today is actually a question. Can love really win? Can love really win? In June, I will complete 40 years in this ministry. I started when I was 5. And and what I have found, among other things, and the incredible blessings and gifts that have come to my life through the work of Dr. Holmes and the other great New Thought teachers, is that Dr. Holmes created not only a science of mind, or what he sometimes affectionately also called the science of mind and spirit, but this is also very deeply a science of heart. Because really what it's all about is bringing us into a deep conviction about who we really are, a re-experience, a re-embrace of the true self, the I am self. We are made in the image and after the nature and likeness of the divine, of that which we have been told is love. We've been told that God is love, and they that dwell in love dwell in God, and God in them. So we are not just loving people, and God is not just loving, but God is love, and so are you, and so am I. We are love made manifest. And that's the greatest thing that we can bring into our lives, is a centering in our hearts. And that's what this brief time together for me is about this day. Dr. Holmes, he put it this way: the life that has not loved has not lived. it is still dead. Love is the sole impulse for creation, and the one who does not have love as the greatest incentive in life has never developed the real creative instinct. So as we hear words like that, not unlike many other words that have been spoken to lift up love, we have to really bring ourselves to the litmus test. And that is, how is this working in my personal arena and in the collective arena of humankind? How's it doing? How's it going? And always, as we look in the personal area, if you're anything like me, you find that there's always the call for greater clarity and consistency. And I see the times in my own life when I'm inconsistent around the heart and inconsistent around being an opening for love. Even though, as I write in my book and we'll talk about in the workshop, the greatest experience I've ever had is the opening of my heart in my early 30s, the profound opening of my heart. And so we get to look at the incongruities of our life when they show up in a compassionate way, with self-compassion, but we have to honor them and look at them. Otherwise, we just sort of fall into speaking about this wonderful thing called love, but not really being a more open channel for it. In fact, just the other day, just my own incongruities, I was in our local Whole Foods. You have those here, right? Yeah. And you know, when you go to Whole Foods, you're supposed to be in this sort of an enlightened frame of mind, you know, and an abundance consciousness as well. But I found myself in the 15 or less items fuming, because the guy in front of me had 21 items in his little thing. I know because I counted them. And I was getting more and more angry about this. This teaching 40 years, but I'm angry at this guy. He is not safe on the streets of my mind in that moment. Not at all. And then all of a sudden, there's that little thing that happens. That's something within you that says, wait a minute, you know better. Do you know of what I'm speaking here? You see, I've often thought we ought to put a disclaimer on our teaching before all of the classes and all of the services saying that there's no going back. You cannot go back once you know this stuff, because something will always remind you to remind you. And so that something within said it's time to open your heart here. You know better than this. I mean, then I thought, would I really be counting the items in a basket if that were a member of my family? Would I really? No, I wouldn't. And so many ways we get to call ourselves home. In the opening chapter of my book, I wrote a prayer that I think every one of us prays in our own unique words. Here's how I pray it. I said, free me, O God, from the deep trance, the web we humans have spun and in which I am now caught. The illusion that your love is somehow distant or absent from this world, from my life, and that I am no longer what you made me to be. Free me from this trance and initiate me anew into the vast and ever-present reality of your endless and all-embracing love, that the fountain of my heart might open up again and overflow onto parched and barren humanscapes that cry out for greening. Yes, free me, O God, that I might realize this instant is love. This instant is love, but how we can go to sleep to it. And then we look at the collective scene. We look at what's going on in our world, and we continue to see themes repeating: increasing strife, inequity, greater and greater suffering. Sadly, we see that humankind seems to be becoming more disconnected and brutal, violence mounting. And with all of this, a kind of discouragement can set in. I have people talk to me about this, a kind of cynicism, as it seems like the future is so bleak, and our hearts cry out, can love really win? Can love really win? And I know that's present for so many. There have been times in my life when it seemed like I just kept beating my head against the same old wall. Am I alone on that one? Good. Because it seems like that's what humanity is doing. It seems like we have been offered an insight and an opportunity, but we continue to avoid the deep, embracing realization that the greatest power in the universe is unconditional spiritual love. The greatest power in the universe. Nothing comes close to it. Nothing comes close to it. And when we embrace it and surrender to it and allow it to work through us as its instrument, we become a light in this world. And it's also written, you are the light of the world. And I tell you, you and I are lights in the world when our hearts convey the essence of unconditional spiritual love. When we move out of what humanity has strayed into and got temporarily waylaid in, and that is the sense of being fear-oriented, fear-based egos. When we move out of that conception and back into our hearts, our greatness starts to show up. Now, it does then seem that, at least is the way I size it up, that the biggest impediment for us in going to the next level is fear. Fear has been our weak point. And fear really because we have concocted this sense, this artificial sense of being isolated beings. That's where psychology came up with the phrase the ego. And it's not really a thing. It's more like a syndrome, a kind of a space we start to create, a false artificial space, but we live out of it and we give it temporary reality. And it's basically about feeling separated. We have felt separated from the divine, therefore we believe we're separated from one another, from life itself, from the earth, separated from our God. And so in that separation, we begin to feel inadequate, we feel fearful, and then what the ego does in that space is start to defend. It defends against everything that is the highest and the best. The ego even defends against love. Of all things, the great healing balm, and yet the ego finds it way too threatening. Too much vulnerability. Maybe I'll be found out, so I steel myself. I close that down. And thus I lower the frequency of my awareness, and my responses are of a lower order. And so then basically what happens is that the ego, while tolerating spirituality, really basically believes that spirituality is weak and foolish. And that really the way to make life work is by dominating others and besting others. That is the successful life. But you know, as we look at the course of history, the whirlwind that has reaped. And I don't know of a single life that became truly, fundamentally joyous and happy and fulfilled through dominating and besting anyone. It doesn't work. Now, I tell you what, the interesting thing, this tyranny of the ego is not a new deal. Even back millennia ago, in Jesus' time, he saw it. And so he tried to be the great example. I love it that we're in a community that understands that he was not the great exception, but he was the great example. He was revealing the possible human and the next levels of vibration and frequency that our consciousness could ascend into, that then we would be the light of the world and we would do the things that he did, and even greater things would we do. And he said that, and he called us to that. And then he really laid it out in a way even more rigorous than the greatest of teachers prior or since, when he said to us, and here's what you got to do when you live with love. You got to also love your enemies. Now the ego says, whoa, no, we're not going there. We'll love when it's comfortable, but not that. And he saw that too. He said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And then later on he would say, if you love those who love you, big whoop. Well, that's my translation. It's really what it was written. He said, if you love those who love you, what is your reward? What reward have you? I mean, it's easy for us to love those we love, but the real test of the healing power of the heart is when we are willing to move into the fire and actually bring our love to our enemies. Again, the ego thinks this is weak and foolish, foolhardy. And that really the way we need to live is by continually honoring force over love. The ego's convinced that in the practical world is what really works. And we've tried that, haven't we? You see, here's what I think we've really got to acknowledge. And it seems like a harsh thing to say, but it really gives us options. The collective awareness of humankind has not yet come to really believe in love. And we need to understand this, that the collective thinking of humankind doesn't really yet believe in love. It really doesn't. Elsewise, we would turn to that as the great wellspring and our first response. Not an afterthought, but our first response. We really don't. So then what can those of us who are on a path, a chosen path of awakening, do about that? Well, what we can do is accept responsibility for that. Now, this doesn't mean that we say that we're to blame. We're definitely not. It means that we have a capacity, we have an ability, we have something that we can bring to that condition of humankind's continual disbelief in the fundamental reality and power of love. And the way we get to do that, claim that responsibility, is work within our own sacred sphere of our life, your personal universe, to become a voice and a vortex of unconditional spiritual healing love, right where you are, such that wherever you go and wherever you leave your vibrational footprint, there will be that resonance there for all who can pick up on that, who can sense the example that your elegant living provides. That's what we can do. That's what we can do. So I want to leave you today with 3 things that I am currently practicing. I invite you to join me if you feel so guided. And they are dissolve barriers, risk connecting, and trust love. Let's work with the first one, dissolve barriers. It seems like what the ego does is build fences and barriers and walls and then tries to stay in an artificial sense of security behind them. And so what we do when we commit to being channels for the highest power is that we start dissolving those barriers wherever they exist. What's the Berlin Wall of your life that needs to come down in your life? Maybe it's with somebody for whom there's been an estrangement or a rift, perhaps. Maybe it's a sense of separation from another group wherein the connecting isn't happening. What is it for you? And what are the options that are available? I shared with you an incident that occurred in the life of a friend of mine. His name's Bob Trask. Bob's a human growth facilitator, a minister now, and an author. Wonderful guy. In one of his books, he writes about something that happened when he was 14. He was playing basketball with a couple of buddies on an open-air basketball court, and they were having a good time until some members of a gang, a local gang, youth gang, showed up. And they told him to get out of there. They wanted to use the court. Well, Bob and his buddy, they got vehement, and they said, "We're not getting out of here." They said some things that I really can't share with you on this pulpit. Anyway, a fight ensued. And ultimately, Bob and his friends came out on top of it, and they chased those gang members away and inflicted a beating in the process. And they went then back playing baseball with what you'd expect, the pride and the bravado that you'd expect. But Bob, in writing about this, says, "But did we win?" He asked that question. Because here's what happened. Unbeknownst to them, one of the kids they beat up was the grandson of a local gang lord. And when the gang lord got wind of this, he put the word out to his gang to take care of Bob and his buddies. And they went after them. They couldn't find him initially, so they started victimizing anybody who went to their school. Finally, they found Bob, and they almost beat him to death. Some witnesses intervened. His 2 buddies didn't fare so well. One was hanged, one was stabbed. And then Bob had to live with the horrible survivor guilt, especially since he'd kind of goaded on his buddies to fight them, that might is right kind of deal. Bob writes about this horrific event in his life. He says, "In retrospect, I realized that had we invited the intruders to play with us instead of chasing them away, things might have been very different. I will always hear the wailing voices of my hanged friend's family. Over the years, that keenly has spoken a message to me greater than its grief. It says, please find a peaceful way to settle problems, because otherwise, even if you win, the results will be worse, far worse than you can imagine." Such wisdom in that, isn't there? Let's dissolve some barriers. Where would you take that in your life? And then the next step in dissolving the barriers is to risk connecting. Risk opening for that connection to happen. Because again, the ego would rather just wall people off or write people off and be done with it. And yet that never really grows us, never blesses us as it might. So we risk connecting. We come out of our little artificial arenas in life and we move back out and we start connecting again. I just recently read about a very wise headmaster of a boys' school on the East Coast called Roxbury Latin Boys' School. And he got the idea that his kids, while getting a great education, were in this little artificial environment and needed to understand the rest of the world and open their hearts to that. So he offered an opportunity to the seniors. And in this particular incident, 6 seniors volunteered to be pallbearers for a homeless man, Norman Miller, who had died alone. There was no next of kin to be found. He was going to be buried in a city cemetery, no headstone, in a common plywood casket. They volunteered to be his pallbearers. They got instructions from the funeral director, dressed up in their finery, their slacks and jackets and ties. And then they carried that simple plywood casket out to the grave and set it down there. And they stood around it and they wrote something together. And they read it in unison. Dear Lord, thank you for opening our hearts and minds to this work of mercy. We are here to bear witness to the life and passing of Nicholas Miller. He died alone with no family to comfort him. But today, we are his family. We are here as his sons. We are honored to stand together before him now to commemorate his life, to remember him in death, and to commend his soul to your perfect care. And then each one was asked to select some passage that they would read. They read that, they did a prayer, they laid flowers on his casket. Then they climbed back in their van to go back to school, but they went back totally different. As I read what they each have said, those young men, their hearts were open to the rest of life, to the challenges our fellow human beings can have. And I love that. They risk getting out of that little bubble they were in and connecting. I just wonder about my own bubbles and how could I move more into that connecting. I invite you to reflect on that. And then finally, what it really all comes down to as we dissolve the barriers and we risk connecting is to finally trust love, to really trust it and know that it can do healing work. What I'll talk about in my workshop is that in my early 30s, I discovered that while I was teaching about love and doing my best to love, my heart was still very much closed and protected. And the greatest path I've ever walked has been, with assistance, the opening of my heart, which I practice every day now. And that beautiful heart chakra is in every one of us. It's a vortex of healing, spiritual, unconditional love. The greatest power there is. And it will heal, advance, and bless our lives in incredible ways. It's helped me get to know myself. In another portion of my book, I wrote a poem, a short poem I'd like to share with you because it really speaks to the power in this heart. It's called Peacemaking. When I embrace my wounds and allow them to heal, I have no impulse to injure you. When I understand my desire to be lifted up, I refuse to tear you down. When I think rightly about myself, I need not make you wrong. And when my cry for love opens my own heart's doors, I no longer close you out. That's what I know. And I invite you into this. I believe there's nothing that this power cannot transform. Nothing, if we'll give it a chance. I was just reading this past week about an ex-Grand Master of the Ku Klux Klan who had terrorized a certain nearly all-black church and later met a woman whose love transformed him, and he was able to drop all that hate, and who then later joined that church and is assisting that church. You don't think love can heal if it's allowed to? But will we give it a chance? That's the big deal. Will we really give it a chance, or let the ego have the leadership of our lives? It's up to us. And when we do let it have a chance, we show up as such a light in this world. I want to share with you, as I close this, about one other personal experience in my life where I experienced that light, that is love. It was in my high school. I was completing my high school, and I was going to the senior prom, and I actually got enough courage up and asked this beautiful girl to go with me, and to my shock, she said yes. And so I began preparing. But I tell you what, the elation that lasted about 15 minutes shifted into sheer panic as I began to prepare for this. I even cleaned out my car, which didn't happen much back then. I remember just scrubbing myself nearly raw that day, dressing up in a tuxedo and having the corsage, and then going over to her house wishing that I would please stop perspiring. But it wasn't happening. And then getting the endless pictures her parents insisted on taking. And then we got in the car to go to this restaurant. I'd booked a restaurant. and the conversation just wasn't flowing, and I'm thinking, why did I do this? Life was so good before this. And we got to this restaurant that I had booked. It was called Top of the Rockies, and it was a wonderful restaurant at the top of one of the tall buildings in Denver. It doesn't exist anymore. And I'd booked that. And so we finally got there, went up the elevator, and the maitre d' set us at a window, which I'd asked for. I was so pleased. And I was so pleased he didn't make a big deal out of us. He didn't say, treat us little high schoolers who got all gussied up. He just was respectful, and I loved that. And then finally, the heavens parted and our conversation started opening up. And we started having a really good time. And I thought, okay, this is good. I'm glad I'm here. This is great. And so they came and took our order. She ordered a shrimp dish, and I ordered a steak. I thought that'd be the manly thing to do. And they brought us our salads, and the conversation was just going great. And I'm thinking, this is awesome. We'll have a great dance, maybe even go to the after party. This is great. And then after our salads, they brought us our food. And she started into her shrimp dish, and I had the steak. And I wanted to be very gracious in how I did things. So I lightly put my fork on it and started to saw away with the knife. And then it happened. And, it's one of those things maybe you've had in your life where it seems like things go into slow motion. Because as I remember it, it didn't really happen quite this way speed-wise. But what I remember, it felt like that steak lifted off the plate in very slow motion. And it sort of soared over about 1.5 feet from the table. And as I reflect about it, it almost seemed to pause there and chide me for having the audacity to feel any amount of confidence whatsoever before it plopped down on the carpet right there beside us. In that moment, I wanted to die. I wanted to become invisible. I wanted to die. And then in like 10 or 12 seconds, that maitre d' that had seated us, who'd been standing over at his station, swooped in, bent down. He took a white towel he'd had over his arm. He swooped up that steak, put it under his arm, and he began to apologize to me. He said, I'm so sorry. I can't believe the kitchen did this. They did not serve that steak on a proper plate. That's not a steak plate. And this is our responsibility. We are very sorry, and I'm going to go cook another steak. This won't happen again. Please forgive us. And off he went. And of course, as in shock as I was, I didn't miss the moment. And I turned to my date and I said, can you believe that? Can you believe that they would serve me a steak that wasn't a steak plate? And God bless her, she played along. She said, yeah, that's pretty stupid. She said, I'll eat real slow until your steak comes. And so about 10 minutes later, here comes this maitre d' with another steak on a peach-colored plate. I don't know where they found that, and he put it down. He said, this is a proper plate. I am so sorry, sir. This will never happen again. I said, thank you. And we had our steaks, had our dessert, and then we're ready to go to the dance. And I remember passing him as we headed toward the elevators, and he said, have a great night. And I said, thank you. And we called the elevator up and waited for it. I'll just never forget that moment. Sometimes you have these moments. I turned and I looked at him, and he just smiled so compassionately and lovingly to me. And it's like the message I got was, life is good, and you're great, and you don't need to worry about it. Just be good to you. Just trust you. You're doing great. Now, I don't know who that guy was. I didn't have the presence of mind to get his name. Of course, I've never seen him. The restaurant's gone. But I love that man. I pray for that guy occasionally. I don't even know if he's still on the planet, because he sent such love and light into a vulnerable young man's heart in that moment. It was an act of grace. And he helped me learn how we can change our world with the little things we can do to be that voice, be that vortex, beginning to shift the collective consciousness into a revering and an expressing of that love. We can do this and be those angels. And I know in a center of this caliber, we're ready and raring to do it. You with me on that? Yeah. All right. Take a deep breath. Let's turn within and open our hearts. That wonderful center of spiritual activity, where the ethereal and yet eternal, ever-present, reality moves itself uniquely through each and every one of us. This beautiful day in this incredible center, I know that the only person present, the only being present is God. And I know that every light being here is an emanation of that divine love. And I affirm and know that something of this spiritual community's energy, something of that which brought you here this day by divine appointment, opens the heart, activates even more fully that wonderful leadership quality of your being. And I know that as it shines forth into your life, I affirm and know blessings, guidance, unfoldment, opportunity, and the very good and joy of life evolving for you. And I further bless this wonderful spiritual community here in Santa Rosa, and I just know it continues to grow, to reach out, to touch, to be a healing force for good, not only here locally, but in our world at large. And we take a moment to visualize our planet bathed in light and bathed in love. The barriers dissolving, connections happening, love being empowered to move us to our next greater yet to be. In all these blessings, we give thanks for the truth that is setting us free, each and every one of us. And as we release this now gratefully into that power that is always moving creation from the inner to the outer, the invisible to the visible, we do so with joy and we declare together, and so it is. Amen. Thank you for the privilege of being with you today.